With all of the things that you have to teach in the course of a school year, how do you know what to spend time on versus what not to spend time on so that you effectively pace throughout the year so that you teach all of the content that you need to teach? That is the question that we're answering in today's new teacher big impact quick tip of the week. I am Daryl Williams Jr., former terrible teacher turned two-time teacher of the year, and every week I go live to answer another question and give you one quick tip that you can apply into your classroom and change the game for real. Because ultimately, I just want to help you become the teacher you've always wanted to be and make the impact you've always wanted to make. And tonight, we're continuing our discussion on effective lesson planning. And we were talking about how lesson plans are built on standards, right? And how to take those standards and turn them into objectives so that we can create engaging lessons and how to spice up our lessons, add a little bit of a razzle dazzle. And then last week we talked about how do we know when it's time to move on to the next lesson. And today we're diving into, okay, now that you're deciding whether to stay in this lesson a little bit longer or students are ready to move on, how do you not take too much time so that you can actually teach all the content you need to teach over the course of the year? So that's what we're diving into today. It's actually broken down into an acronym that I call PACE, or PACE. So the PACE framework for effective lesson planning, to make sure that you pace yourself throughout the year so that you teach all the content you need to teach. That's really what leads to student information retention and transformation. So let's lock in and dive in and get it going. If you are watching a replay, appreciate you for being here. If you are live with us here tonight, let's interact, engage in the chat. I'm looking, I see you. Let's see how it is going. But first of all, want to make sure that we let you know that what I'm diving into right now is actually module 4 in the lesson called How to Properly Plan Effective Lessons, which lives inside of Impact. And if you don't know what Impact is, you should by now, because impact is the solution that you've been looking for to really take control of your career. If you're tired of waiting for somebody else to assign professional development for you, if you're tired of trying to find support in your building and not finding it, and if you're tired of not being able to walk in your true authenticity inside of your classroom, then Impact is your solution, because it features courses, it features content, it features community, it features coaching, which will allow you to become the teacher you've always wanted to be and make the impact you've always wanted to make. You can look at the link in the description below to find out more information and to subscribe and become an Impact member, where we'll talk about more lessons just like this on how to plan effective lessons. So let's get into it. The PACE framework is very simple, but like I said, it's going to help you spend time pacing throughout the entire school year. So the PACE framework, PACE, the P in the PACE framework stands for plan the standards. The P stands for plan the standards. If we're taking notes, now's a great time to write that down. We're planning the standards, meaning we're looking at the unpacking document, or we're looking at the standards that are supposed to be taught for this particular subject and this particular grade level. And we're planning out where we're going to spend our time, or planning out the standards that we need to hit. As you know, not all standards are created equal. Right? Not all standards are created equal. There are standards that some people refer to as power standards, and there are standards that are supporting standards. Power standards are those standards that are meaningful and impactful because they lead to something else, whether it's something else within this same grade level or it's something that is building upon in future grade levels. So, for example, if we're talking about um, English, like something inside of phonics, like blending CVC words, that's a power standard. Why? Because when they move on to the next grade level and they have to actually use CVC words, and now we're creating compound words and things like that, like we need to make sure that the blending is solid. So blending would be a powerful standard that you really need to make sure you focus on. So when I say plan the standards, what I'm saying is prepare, plan what the standards are that you definitely need to know that you have to focus on. How much time do you anticipate spending on them, and order them with intention. Like, just because you look at the unpacking document and it says that these are the standards that need to be covered in this particular grade level, that doesn't necessarily mean that it needs to go in that particular order. You know your students, you know yourself, you know what it is going to take. So the standards don't have to be taught in that particular order, right? The standards are need to be taught, but you can rearrange them into a way that makes sense for your students and the learners that you have in your classroom. So when I say plan the standards, that is what it is that we're talking about. And for somebody that's saying, "Well, I can't even do that because my district told me that we have to use this curriculum and we can't veer off." Okay. Well, if you are stuck to a curriculum, Remember, curriculum is a resource. Standards are the foundation. So we're still making sure that we use the standards. But even as you're using that curriculum, look through and plan out what are the standards that we're making sure that we teach. You probably don't have that flexibility in order to reorder it if you're locked into a curriculum, but you can still recognize which ones are going to be a heavy emphasis versus which ones are not. So in the PACE framework of proper effective lesson planning, the P stands for plan the standards. The A, the A stands for allocate instructional time, right? So I'm walking you through the process that you should go through in order to make sure that you have the time that you need to complete the instruction that you have to complete over the course of a year. P, plan the standards. A, allocate the instructional time. What I mean by that is you're going to match the standards to the instructional days that you have. But watch how we do this because the instructional days may or may not necessarily be what you anticipated. Because maybe on the calendar it says you have 178 days or 175 days, or maybe you're in a district where you go by the amount of hours. But you know that not all of those hours are actually going to be used for instruction because you know they're professional development days, right? You know there are pep rallies, you know there are field trips, you know there are activities that are going to be in the gym. You know that testing is going to happen within the last 10 days. So we can take 10 days off of that calendar, right? You know, the first 10 days are going to be spent, well, X amount of days are going to be spent going over rules and procedures. You know, the day after a break, you're going to have to do a reset. So when you really go through the calendar, really look at the actual amount of days that you have. It might surprise you that, man, on the calendar, it says we have 178 days, but in actuality, we have 151. Like when I really look at it, we were going to the pumpkin patch on this day. Oh, we're taking them to Six Flags on that day. Like when you look at all the things that you actually have going on, oh, these days we're gonna was reserved. It's a Spirit Field Day. This is Spirit Week. This is Pep Rally. Like when you have all those things going on, really unpacking and say, wow, we really only have blank amount of days. Because once you recognize the amount of days that you actually have, then you can put the standards that you have on, which is actually the letter C, which is calendarize the standards. So P, you're going to plan the standards. A, you're going to allocate the instructional time. How many days do you actually have? And C, now you're going to calendarize the standards. Now that you recognize how many days you have, put the standards on the calendar and say, boom, I have a week here, I have 2 weeks there. You understand what I'm saying? I hope it. And if you want to get fancy with it, and you want to color code, and you want to, and you want to make it look nice and pretty, you definitely can. But ultimately, what you want to do is you want to make sure that you're looking at how many instructional days you actually have, and planning out how many days you anticipate the standard is going to take. And then within the standards, you're breaking up the standards into manageable chunks that we like to call objectives. All right. You see it. You got it. You know what's going on. That's what we are talking about. Okay. So make sure that you are calendarizing the standards. And in doing so, this is another great way to avoid missteps. How many of us have ever started teaching something and then we look in there and we realize that we think that it's going to take us, 6 days, right? But then that sixth day is like the Friday before a break, or that seventh day would be the Friday before the break. So it's like, should I really start a new standard on the Friday before break? Probably not, right? So you can avoid missteps by preparing or pre-planning and looking at everything you have over the course of the year and saying, okay, cool. Ah, man, that butts up right into winter break. Let me not start a new standard right there. I'll just continue the standard we're working on, wrap that up, and then move on when we get back. Something of that nature. But look out for those types of things, 4-day weekends, breaks, holidays, the day after Halloween. I remember last year I was in charge of, or 2 years ago, I was in charge of the testing calendar. And I got a lot of kickback because our spring our spring benchmark assessments were after, what was it? Valentine's Day. It was the day after Valentine's Day. And they were like, good and well, you shouldn't have put testing the day after Valentine's Day. I was like, whatever. But when you're in your class, you got one thing I could have done, I guess, is calendarize and pay attention to those types of things, right? And say, oh man, yeah, maybe we shouldn't have done it this day. We should have slid it back one day. Whatever. That was a mistake I made, but you can avoid missteps by calendarizing the standards. All right. And then again, make sure that you pay attention to like testing days and things like that, because that's obviously not going to be days that you can use if we're doing iReady test or some sort of diagnostic test or a universal screener, or at the end of the year's testing or mid-year testing finals and benchmarks and all those types of things. Make sure that you avoid putting instructional time on those days as well, because you know you're not going to be teaching anything on those days, right? The P stands for plan the standards. The A stands for allocate instructional time. The C stands for calendarize the standards. Are you ready for the E? Are you ready for the last step? Are you ready to pace out your year and make sure that you teach all of the information? The E stands for evaluate and adjust. Stay flexible. As much work as you put in, nobody's perfect. All right. You're going to anticipate that this is going to take 6 days and may end up taking 8. You might anticipate that this is going to take 14 days. You wound up getting it done in 11, right? You just adjust and be flexible. So evaluate, basically checking out the lesson that we talked about last week or inside of Impact on how to properly plan effective lessons, and make sure that we're using formative assessment data to determine if the next lesson is within reach for students. If so, we're moving on. If not, we're sticking a little bit, but being cognizant that we don't spend too much time. That's where it always gets a little bit tricky. But that's the process that we're going through to evaluate. This is a living document that you're utilizing, right? It's a living document that's saying, okay, cool. Some days or some standards are going to take me longer than I anticipated. Some objectives even are going to take less time than I anticipated, but adjust along the way. And then when things pop up, things that we could not anticipate, we have an intruder drill and I'm not able to teach this class, right? Or whatever, right? Our school is on lockdown and we couldn't teach, whatever. Be flexible. Nothing is perfect, right? So PACE is how you pace out the year. You plan the standards, you allocate the instructional time, then you calendarize the standards, but most importantly, you evaluate and adjust along the way. And if you incorporate this system, then you will be looking at your year as a whole and you're able to effectively plan lessons that actually lead to student retention, because you are not rushing at the end. You have enough time. You're able to do the things that you want to do. Students are receiving the information, the achievement data is increasing, and you are on path to becoming the teacher you've always wanted to be and making the impact that you've always wanted to make. I'm super, super proud of you. Next week, we're going to dive into how can you tell if a lesson was effective. That is a game changer. How can you tell if a lesson was effective? So join us next week to go through that. But if you can't wait, if you've been enjoying these, if you really feel like you need to strengthen your lesson planning, then you can get access to the full course, which is going to be inside of Impact. And again, Impact is the solution you've been looking for you to take control of your career, because you can choose your own relevant professional development. You can find your own community support in our online membership area, and you can have a huge impact without making a huge investment, because getting started at just $13 seems like a no-brainer. The link is in the description below. I'll see you next week for our new Teacher Big Impact quick tip of the week. Take care.